The accusation. The cry tore through the courtroom like glass shattering on marble. I never touched her. Please believe me. Maya Williams' voice cracked under the weight of her own desperation. Her chest heaved, her dark skin glistening with nervous sweat as though the air itself sought to choke her. She gripped the edge of the defendant's table so tightly her knuckles turned bone-white. And for a heartbeat, her wide, tear-brimmed eyes searched the faces around her, hoping to find even a flicker of compassion. But compassion was absent here. The Dallas County Courthouse was a cathedral of judgment that morning, its wood-paneled walls echoing with whispers sharper than blades. The murmurs from the gallery swelled into hisses, then into sneers, each syllable twisting into accusation. Monster. Child beater. She should rot in prison. Every word clawed at her skin, each whisper another lash across her dignity. The judge raised his gavel. Order in the court. The crack of wood against wood rang out, but it hardly mattered. Order was a dream already shattered. Maya's legs trembled under the weight of a verdict already written in strangers' eyes. She longed to disappear, to vanish into the cracks between tiles, but she forced herself upright. She had to. For Lily. For her little Lily. At the plaintiff's table, Veronica Hale sat poised, a pearl necklace gleaming against her pale skin, her lips curled into the faintest smile, the kind that disguised poison beneath grace. She leaned toward Richard Hale, her husband, billionaire oil magnate, philanthropist, darling of Texas society, and her voice, though hushed, carried sharp enough to cut. The longer this drags on, the more she'll spin her lies. We need this finished, for Lily's sake. Richard's jaw tightened. His gaze remained fixed on Maya, but the way he leaned ever so slightly toward Veronica betrayed his alignment. Her presence was his armor, her hand on his forearm a chain binding his judgment. Maya saw it, and the sight tore something inside her. Richard, her voice cracked into sobs. Please look at me. You know me. For 3 years I raised your daughter when you were too busy chasing boardrooms and deals. I fed her, rocked her to sleep. I never hurt Lily. Her voice echoed, raw and pleading. For a fleeting second, Richard's eyes faltered. A memory flickered across his face. Lily's laughter filling the long halls of their Dallas estate. Maya's lullabies carrying softly in the night when business trips had stolen him away. But then Veronica's hand slid over his, her manicured nails pressing ever so gently, reminding him of the script she had written for him. Richard's eyes hardened again. His voice, once warm, now cut like ice. You betrayed my trust, Maya. My daughter had bruises on her face, and you expect me to believe that was an accident? You, of all people, dared to lay a hand on her? Maya shook her head violently, tears splashing onto the table. Her body trembled with a grief too heavy for her frame. That's not true. Ask Mrs. Peterson next door. Ask the cashier at the store. We baked cookies that night. Lily was laughing. She was happy. Her words broke into sobs, her lungs heaving as though each breath was a punishment. Richard, don't let her twist this. You know me. You've seen me with Lily. You know I could never. But her plea dissolved in the thick fog of accusations. The prosecutor seized the moment, rising with the sharp precision of a man who knew victory was near. Your Honor, the defendant's display is nothing more than manipulation. We have photographs. We have testimony. The child's own father affirms the truth of this abuse. The evidence speaks louder than these theatrics. Lies. Maya cried, her voice raw. Those bruises are lies. I have receipts. I was at the store, I made dinner, Lily laughed all night. Ask the neighbors. Ask her teacher. But the gallery wasn't listening. The prosecutor's voice boomed with the confidence of authority, while Maya's cries dissolved into the din. Your Honor, the prosecutor continued, these emotional outbursts are a smokescreen. The photographs don't lie. The child doesn't lie. This case is straightforward. The defense has no real evidence. And then, so faint it nearly vanished in the storm, a whisper trembled from the plaintiff's table. Daddy. Richard bent his head toward Lily, his daughter, a small golden-haired girl no more than 8, clutching her stuffed bunny so tightly its stitched ear bent out of place. Her voice was so quiet, so fragile, it barely reached even her father's ears. It's okay, sweetheart, he murmured. But beside him, Veronica's smile deepened. She had orchestrated every detail. The carefully painted bruises on Lily's delicate skin, The whispered threats that stole the child's courage, the doubts planted like thorns in Richard's heart. Now she needed only silence and a swift conviction. At the defense table, Maya's lawyer, Laura Bennett, sharp-eyed and resolute, touched her client's arm. "Maya, sit, please. We'll present our evidence when it's our turn." But Maya's voice cracked hollow. Evidence doesn't matter when no one's listening. From the gallery, the chorus of insults continued. Disgusting. Throw her in prison. How could she put her hands on a child? Maya bowed her head, sobbing openly now. Each tear burned with not only sorrow but shame. Shame at being paraded like a criminal before people who had never known her laughter. Her prayers, her sleepless nights of nurturing a child who wasn't hers. She raised her eyes once more, swollen and desperate, and locked onto Richard. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "Don't let her do this, to me, to Lily. I swear on everything I am, I never hurt your daughter." But Richard's gaze never lifted. Veronica's hand still rested on his arm, tethering him to her will. His eyes remained fixed on the polished wood of the table, as though meeting Maya's gaze would shatter the fragile mask he wore. The judge's gavel struck. "Court will recess for 1 hour." The sound was final, cold, merciless. The bailiff gestured for Maya to sit back, and she lowered herself onto the hard wooden bench. Her chest heaved, tears still spilling unchecked down her cheeks. Around her, people shifted, whispered, sneered. No one offered a hand. No one met her gaze with kindness. To them, she was already condemned. Laura leaned close, her voice low but firm. "We'll fight. Don't lose yourself now." Maya pressed her palms together as if in prayer. Her voice broke on a whisper. "If they believe her, I'll lose Lily forever. And then, what's left of me?" Richard stood across the room, adjusting his cufflinks. Veronica glided beside him, graceful, victorious, her smile as polished as her pearls. She didn't even glance at Maya as they left the courtroom. Maya sat alone, shaking. She closed her eyes, whispering only to herself, "God, don't let them take her from me. Not like this. Please, not like this." The recess ticked away, and when the gavel struck again, the trial resumed. Maya's tears had dried into salt on her cheeks, but in her chest, a spark still burned, small, fragile, stubborn, the spark of a woman who refused to surrender, even when the world turned against her. But for now, the courthouse air clung to her like smoke, heavy and suffocating, as she was led back into the small holding room. Her mind was a storm of whispers, insults, and Richard's unflinching refusal to meet her eyes. And in the silence of that holding room, Maya Williams, maid, caretaker, accused, sat with her hands trembling in her lap, and vowed silently that no matter how dark this path became, she would fight until her last breath to protect the truth. Shadows of the past. The courthouse had adjourned for the day, but Maya's mind could not escape the suffocating echoes of accusation that lingered in every corner of her memory. She sat alone in her cell that evening, her body hunched forward, hands clasped tightly as though she could hold herself together if she simply refused to let go. The gray concrete walls pressed in like silent witnesses, and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead felt like a cruel reminder of how far she had fallen. For 3 years she had lived inside the vast Hale estate, walking on polished marble floors, tending to sparkling chandeliers, whispering lullabies into Lily's ear, while the world outside forgot her existence. Yet here she was now, stripped of her uniform, stripped of her dignity, and treated as though the only thing that defined her was the word criminal. Memories came unbidden, weaving themselves into her present misery. She remembered the first time she had met Lily, the little girl clutching a stuffed bunny so old its seams had begun to fray. Maya had been nervous that day, walking into the Hale mansion with its towering columns and sweeping staircases. It was a world so far removed from her own, a girl raised in a 2-bedroom home on the south side of Dallas, who had once shared a mattress with 2 siblings and thought herself lucky to have a roof that did not leak when it rained. She had not applied to work for a billionaire. She had answered an agency's call and showed up where they told her. She remembered the way Richard had barely looked up from his newspaper when she was introduced, his attention already swallowed by the world of business deals and oil contracts. It was Lily who had reached for her hand, Lily who had whispered shyly, "Do you sing songs at bedtime?" And it was in that fragile question that Maya had seen a child starved not for food or toys, but for love. Those early months had been a whirlwind of learning. Lily was quiet, timid around strangers, and always looked over her shoulder for approval that never came from her stepmother. Veronica treated the child as though she were porcelain, dressing her in expensive gowns, parading her at charity luncheons, but rarely kneeling down to look into her eyes. Richard was absent more often than not, and when he was present, his affection was stiff, the kind of affection that could be measured in gifts rather than in embraces. Into that emptiness, Maya poured everything she had. She read to Lily until the girl fell asleep with a book resting across her chest. She baked cookies with her in the grand kitchen that always smelled too sterile until butter and sugar filled the air. She learned Lily's nightmares and the songs that soothed them, the games that made her laugh and the fears that made her cry. And somewhere in that quiet rhythm of days, Maya stopped feeling like an employee and began to feel like something else, an anchor in the little girl's fragile world. But now, that bond had become the very rope used to strangle her reputation. Maya pressed her palms against her face, tears burning her eyes, not just for herself but for Lily. If she lost this case, if the lies succeeded, she would not only lose her freedom, but she would vanish from Lily's life forever. The thought of Lily waking up in the night, whispering her name, and finding only silence, that was the punishment that broke Maya's spirit more than prison ever could. Laura Bennett arrived late that evening, the lawyer's heels clicking against the concrete floor as the guard escorted her into the small interview room. Laura was not a woman easily rattled. Her hair, sleek and dark, framed a face sharpened by years of courtroom battles, and her eyes carried the glint of someone who had spent her life dissecting lies from truth. She sat across from Maya, folding her hands carefully over a stack of files, and for a long moment, she simply studied her client. "You look exhausted," Laura said at last, her tone soft but steady. "I am," Maya admitted, her voice hoarse. "I can't eat, I can't sleep. All I hear are their voices, the jury, the gallery, even Richard's. They all look at me like I'm already guilty." Laura leaned forward slightly, her expression hardening with conviction. "Listen to me, Maya. Trials are not about who shouts the loudest. They're about evidence. And right now, Veronica's case is smoke and mirrors. Photographs can be staged. Testimony can be coached. What they don't have is proof. But we have your history, your neighbors, the people who saw you with Lily that night. We will make them listen." Maya swallowed hard, wanting desperately to believe. But fear gnawed at her. "And if they don't? If they believe her lies? I'll lose Lily, Laura. She's all I have." Laura's gaze softened, but her words remained fierce. "Then you fight with every ounce of who you are. You don't give up. Not for her. Not for yourself." After Laura left, Maya lay awake in the thin prison cot, her body still and rigid while her mind roamed restlessly through years of memories. She remembered her mother's words spoken long ago when life was nothing but survival. "The world won't hand you justice, Maya. You'll have to fight for it tooth and nail, and even then you might bleed more than you win. But fight anyway, because if you stop, they'll decide your story for you." That night she made a silent vow. She would not let Veronica decide her story. She would not let the whispers of strangers erase the truth of who she was. Even if the world turned its back, she would fight. Not because she believed she could win, but because Lily deserved someone who refused to give up on her. The next morning, the trial resumed, and the courthouse swelled once again with cameras flashing and reporters shouting headlines. Maya was led inside in chains, her wrists bound though she had harmed no one. The cameras devoured her image, painting her as a villain for the evening news. Yet as she entered, she lifted her chin, her heart trembling but her spirit unbroken. She thought of Lily's small hands clutching her bunny, of the laughter that had once filled the grand estate, and she knew she carried those memories like armor. Veronica watched her from across the room, her smile thin and triumphant. Richard avoided her gaze, his face unreadable, but Maya did not look away this time. She met their eyes, and though fear coiled in her stomach, her voice echoed silently in her heart. "I will fight you. I will fight until the truth is the only thing left standing." Breaking point. The courthouse was colder on the third day, though no one had touched the thermostat. It was not the kind of chill that came from air vents or drafts seeping through old woodwork. It was the kind of chill born from tension, from the weight of silence heavy enough to press against the ribs of everyone seated there. When Maya was escorted inside, she felt it immediately. Her wrists still bore the faint red marks of handcuffs, though the bailiff removed them as soon as she sat down at the defense table. Across the aisle, Veronica and Richard sat together, A picture of elegance and wealth, their suits tailored, their posture pristine. Between them, Lily sat small and silent, her eyes fixed on her lap, her bunny clutched tighter than ever. The judge called the court to order, his voice heavy with the authority of decades spent ruling from behind that bench. The prosecution wasted no time, summoning a series of witnesses designed to paint Maya into a monster. A pediatrician testified about the bruises, pointing to photographs enlarged on a projector. The images cast across the courtroom walls seemed grotesque under the harsh light. Lily's fair skin marked by blotches of purple and blue. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Maya's stomach twisted as she watched, her fingers digging into her palms until her nails left crescent moons in her skin. She wanted to shout, to scream the truth that the marks were staged, that she had never raised a hand to the child. But her lawyer placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Wait," Laura whispered. "Patience." Then came Veronica herself, taking the stand with the grace of a woman accustomed to audiences. Her voice was calm, measured, dripping with the kind of polished sympathy that could sway hearts. She spoke of sleepless nights, of a mother's intuition, of the pain she felt discovering her stepdaughter had been mistreated by the very woman trusted to care for her. Every word was rehearsed, her pauses perfectly timed to allow tears to glisten at the corners of her eyes. To anyone watching, she appeared the very embodiment of wounded nobility, standing tall against injustice. Maya listened, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. She wanted to shout that Veronica was lying, that she had twisted Lily's fear into silence, that the bruises were nothing but a mask of makeup and manipulation. But the courtroom belonged to Veronica now, and her performance wrapped the jurors in a cocoon of deceit. Even Richard seemed entranced, his eyes locked on his wife, his jaw firm as though every word she spoke confirmed what he desperately wanted to believe. When the cross-examination began, Laura rose with quiet strength. She moved like a predator through the courtroom, her voice calm but sharp as she pressed Veronica on the details of her story. What time had she discovered the bruises? Why had she waited so long to report them? Who else had seen them before the photographs were taken? Each question was a needle pricking holes in the fabric of her testimony. Yet Veronica remained composed, weaving around the barbs with feigned humility. The jury leaned forward, hanging on every word, their expressions caught between sympathy and suspicion. And then came the moment that nearly broke Maya entirely. The prosecution called Lily to the stand. The child rose slowly, her small frame dwarfed by the wooden seat where she was placed. She looked even smaller under the fluorescent lights, her hands trembling as she held her bunny close. The prosecutor crouched slightly, softening his tone, speaking to her as one would to a frightened bird. "Lily, sweetheart, do you remember telling your daddy what happened?" Lily nodded once, barely perceptible, her eyes still fixed downward. "And who was it that hurt you?" the prosecutor asked gently. Silence fell like a hammer. The room seemed to lean forward, waiting. Maya's heart pounded against her ribs, each beat screaming for the truth, for the child she loved to lift her head and defend her. But Lily's lips parted, and a single word slipped out, fragile but devastating. "Maya." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, whispers thickened into condemnation. Maya felt the air leave her lungs as if she had been struck. Her body slumped forward, her chest burning as tears welled uncontrollably. "No," she whispered to herself, shaking her head violently. No, that's not true." Laura leapt to her feet, objecting, demanding the child's testimony be struck given her age and the possibility of coercion. But the damage had been done. The jurors exchanged glances. The gallery hissed its judgment, and Veronica's satisfied smile curled like smoke around the edges of Maya's despair. When the judge called another recess, Maya stumbled into the holding room like a woman broken in half. She collapsed into the chair, her body shaking with sobs she could no longer control. Laura followed, her face pale but her eyes burning with determination. "Maya," she said firmly, "you cannot give up now. I know what this looks like, but children can be manipulated." I could see her trembling. She scared Maya, not of you but of them. But Maya buried her face in her hands, her voice muffled by despair. "She said my name, Laura. She said it in front of everyone. How can anyone believe me now? How do I fight against the very child I love?" Laura crouched in front of her, gripping her shoulders. "You fight because you know the truth. You fight because Lily is too young to fight for herself. They have her trapped, but if we keep pressing, if we find the cracks in Veronica's story, the truth will surface. It always does. Yet Maya's heart was heavy with doubt. The whispers from the gallery haunted her. The image of Lily's downcast eyes replayed endlessly in her mind. And in that dim holding room she wondered if perhaps she was fighting a battle already lost. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of grief and exhaustion, a small ember still glowed. The ember that had carried her through nights of poverty, through days of exhaustion, through years of raising a child not her own. She wiped her tears, her breathing still ragged, and whispered more to herself than to Laura. If I give up now, then Veronica wins. And Lily loses. I can't let that happen. Laura's eyes softened. That's the woman I need in that courtroom. That's the woman Lily needs. When they returned to the courtroom, Maya sat taller, her face still swollen from tears, but her posture straighter, her resolve harder. She would endure the whispers, the accusations, even Lily's trembling words, because she knew the truth. And she would hold on to it, even if it broke her, even if it carried her to the breaking point of her soul. The girl's voice. The weight of Lily's trembling voice lingered in Maya's ears long after the courtroom emptied for the evening. That single word, her name spoken as though it were an admission of guilt, echoed in her chest like a cruel verdict already handed down. The world outside the courthouse had wasted no time devouring the moment. Headlines sprawled across newspapers and television broadcasts, each one harsher than the last. Billionaire's daughter names abuser in court. Child betrayed by trusted caretaker. Monster behind the mansion walls. By the time Maya was escorted back to her cell, she knew that her reputation had already been condemned in the court of public opinion. But for Maya, the true wound was not in the headlines nor in the whispers that carved her dignity to shreds. The true wound was in Lily's downcast eyes, in the way the child could not meet her gaze as she spoke the words that cut her so deeply. That night, as Maya lay sleepless on her narrow cot, she clung to every memory of the little girl she had raised. She remembered the way Lily once squealed with laughter while chasing bubbles across the estate's manicured lawns, the way her tiny hands would tug at Maya's apron strings, begging her to bake just one more cookie. She remembered nights when Lily's nightmares would wake her screaming, and how she had sung softly until the child drifted back into peace. These were not the memories of an abuser. They were the memories of a bond forged in love, and if that bond had been twisted, it was not by Lily's will, but by Veronica's manipulation. Meanwhile, inside the gilded walls of the Hale estate, Lily sat curled up on her canopy bed, her bunny pressed so tightly to her chest it seemed she feared it would vanish. The bedroom, decorated with pastel curtains and shelves of dolls, offered no comfort. Veronica stood by the doorway, her perfume sharp in the air, her arms crossed as she spoke with cold precision. "You did well today," she said, her tone clipped. "You remembered what I told you. That's good. That's what keeps us safe." Lily's lips quivered, her small voice breaking. "But I don't want to say Maya hurt me." She didn't. She never did. Veronica's eyes darkened, her smile twisting like a blade. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so it slithered like a threat. "Listen to me, Lily. If you tell anyone otherwise, terrible things will happen. Do you want to see Maya locked away forever? Do you want your father to hate you for confusing the truth? Do you want me to leave and never come back?" The words struck the child like blows. Lily shook her head violently, her eyes flooding with tears. "No, please. I just want everything to be like before." "Then you keep quiet," Veronica hissed, her manicured fingers tilting Lily's chin upward. "You keep saying what you said today. If you don't, I promise you, life will become very, very difficult." When Veronica finally left the room, the girl buried her face into her bunny's worn fur, her small body shuddering with sobs she dared not let anyone hear. Deep in her heart, Lily knew the truth. Maya had never hurt her. Maya was the one who loved her when no one else noticed. But the fear Veronica planted weighed on her like chains. She wanted to speak, to cry out the truth. But the thought of losing her father's love, or worse, losing Maya forever, terrified her into silence. The next day, the trial resumed, and the courtroom brimmed once more with curious spectators and flashing cameras. This time, however, the defense would begin presenting its case. Laura Bennett stood tall, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. She called neighbors who testified to seeing Lily playing happily with Maya the night the alleged abuse occurred. She called the cashier from the local grocery store, who remembered Maya and Lily shopping together, laughing as they picked out cookie ingredients. Each testimony wove a thread of doubt into the prosecution's fabric. Yet Maya could see how difficult it was for the jury to reconcile these accounts with the haunting images of bruises. Truth battled perception, and perception remained a powerful adversary. Then Laura did something unexpected. She requested permission to call a character witness who had once worked briefly at the Hale estate, an older housekeeper named Mrs. Simmons, dismissed months earlier by Veronica for incompetence. Mrs. Simmons took the stand with hesitation, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes carried a quiet fire. She testified not only to Maya's tenderness with Lily, but also to Veronica's temper. She described evenings when Veronica's voice could be heard raised in fury, and moments when Lily would run to Maya for comfort afterward. Her testimony painted a picture of a household not of harmony but of fear, where appearances masked deeper fractures. The courtroom shifted uneasily. Jurors exchanged glances. Richard's face tightened as though he wanted to dismiss the words, yet they lodged themselves into his mind. For the first time he seemed to waver, and yet the greatest test still lay ahead. That evening, after court adjourned, Lily lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling. Sleep would not come. Veronica's threats echoed in her ears, but so did Maya's lullabies. Somewhere in the stillness of the night, a decision began to form in the little girl's heart. She was afraid, terrified in fact, but she also knew that lies had consequences. And the thought of Maya spending her life behind bars because of a lie she had been forced to repeat gnawed at her soul. She hugged her bunny tighter, whispering into its stitched ear, "I'm scared, but I have to tell the truth." By the time dawn broke, the girl's resolve had hardened. Though fear still wrapped itself around her small frame, she did not know how or when, but she promised herself that when the moment came, she would find her voice. The truth unveiled. The fifth day of the trial dawned with a heaviness that seemed to settle over the city itself. The Dallas courthouse was once again crowded with reporters, their cameras flashing like restless lightning as Maya was escorted through the stone archway. She kept her chin high, though her eyes betrayed the exhaustion of sleepless nights and the weight of an accusation that had already bruised her soul. Laura walked beside her, a briefcase in hand, her stride purposeful, her expression unreadable. Together, they entered the chamber where everything would soon be decided. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, as though every spectator sensed that the trial was reaching its climax. Veronica sat poised at the plaintiff's table, a vision of cold elegance, her pearl necklace gleaming like polished armor. Richard sat beside her, his jaw tight, his eyes hollow, betraying the storm that brewed within him. And there, between them, Lily sat silent, her bunny clutched so tightly its seams threatened to tear. Her small face was pale, her lips pressed together as though she held back a secret too heavy for her young heart. The prosecutor opened the day with a flourish, presenting closing arguments steeped in moral outrage. He pointed to the photographs once more, to Lily's timid testimony, to Richard's shaken trust. "This case is not complicated," he declared, his voice rising with performative fervor. "We are here because a vulnerable child was hurt by the very woman entrusted to protect her. We are here because betrayal hides behind masks of kindness, and we are here because no child should ever have to fear the one they call caregiver." His words landed like stones cast into a pond, rippling through the jury with calculated effect. The gallery murmured, nodding, their judgment once again sharpening like knives. When it was Laura's turn, she rose slowly, deliberately, and the room stilled. She did not storm or shout. Instead, she spoke with the steady cadence of truth. She reminded the jury of the neighbor's testimony, of the cashier who remembered a laughing child, of Mrs. Simmons's warnings about Veronica's temper. She held up not photographs, but the idea of character. The years Maya had poured into raising Lily, the countless nights she had sacrificed to comfort a child who was not her own. "Ladies and gentlemen," Laura said, her voice carrying like a low bell, "you must ask yourselves one question. Does this sound like a woman who would harm a child? Or does it sound like a woman who has been made the scapegoat of another's ambition?" Her words pierced the silence, but the jurors remained inscrutable. And then came the moment no one expected. As Laura prepared to return to her seat, Lily suddenly shifted in her chair. Her small hands trembled, her bunny slipped from her grip and tumbled to the floor, but she did not bend to pick it up. Instead, she rose slowly, her knees shaking, her lips quivering. The courtroom froze, every eye drawn to her fragile frame. "Your Honor," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Can I say something?" The judge, startled, adjusted his glasses. "Child, you've already testified." "Please," Lily interrupted, her voice trembling but louder this time. "I need to tell the truth." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Veronica's face stiffened, her composure cracking for the first time. She leaned forward sharply, her nails digging into Richard's arm, whispering a warning. But Lily's eyes had already filled with tears, her gaze shifting toward Maya, who sat frozen, breath caught in her throat. "I lied," the little girl said, her words spilling out in a rush. "I lied because she told me to." She lifted a trembling finger toward Veronica, her voice cracking under the weight of her confession. "Maya never hurt me. She never did. She's the one who loves me. She's the one who takes care of me when no one else does. I said her name because I was scared. I was scared of what would happen if I didn't." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted, cameras exploded in flashes, the gallery gasped and murmured, their judgments turning on a dime. The judge banged his gavel furiously, demanding order. But the words had already shattered the narrative Veronica had so carefully constructed. Richard's face went pale as he stared at his daughter, his hands trembling. "Lily," he whispered. But the child was already crying, her small shoulders shaking as she clung to her truth. Veronica's composure collapsed entirely. She lunged forward, hissing at Lily. "You foolish girl, do you know what you've done?" But her outburst only confirmed what Lily had revealed. The jury's eyes widened, the judge's gavel slammed once more, and Laura seized the moment. "Your Honor," she said firmly, her voice ringing with triumph, "we have just heard the most uncoached, unfiltered testimony of all. The truth has finally been spoken, not by lawyers, not by adults with motives, but by the very child at the heart of this case. Maya Williams is innocent." Maya sat trembling, her tears spilling freely now, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of release, of gratitude, of the fragile hope that had carried her through endless nights finally breaking into light. She wanted to rush to Lily, to hold her, to thank her, but she remained rooted to her chair, bound by procedure and by the enormity of what had just happened. Richard buried his face in his hands, his mind unraveling as the truth struck him with unbearable force. For weeks he had believed the worst, allowing himself to be guided by Veronica's poison, and now in front of the world his daughter had laid bare the lie he had chosen to embrace. Shame scorched his soul, heavier than any courtroom judgment. The judge called for a recess, but no one could deny that the trial had already shifted irreversibly. Maya's name, once dragged through the mud, now shimmered with the possibility of vindication. The gallery, once united in condemnation, now buzzed with stunned disbelief. And at the center of it all, Lily sat small and fragile, her face wet with tears, but her voice finally free. In that moment, Maya realized something profound. Truth was not a weapon of the strong, but of the brave. And her little Lily, terrified, trembling, yet unwilling to let fear win, had proven braver than them all. Redemption and healing. The courthouse had always felt like a tomb to Maya, a place where her hope was buried beneath lies and suspicion. But on that sixth day, when the trial resumed after Lily's courageous outburst, something shifted in the air. The coldness that had wrapped itself around the wood-paneled walls seemed to thaw. The glares from the jury softened into something resembling sympathy, and the gallery that once spat whispers of condemnation now hummed with the quiet tension of disbelief. For the first time since this nightmare began, Maya felt as though she was not entirely alone. When the judge reconvened the session, he demanded calm, though even he could not completely mask the gravity of what had just occurred. His gavel pounded for silence, and then he addressed the child seated at the heart of it all. "Lily," he said, his voice measured but not unkind, "the truth you spoke yesterday has weight. The court takes such statements seriously, but I must ask again, are you certain of what you said?" Lily's hands trembled, but her eyes, still damp with tears, shone with a steadiness that had not been there before. She nodded firmly, her voice steady despite the crack of emotion that lingered. "Yes, Your Honor, Maya never hurt me. She never did. Veronica made me say it." The words, simple as they were, struck the courtroom with the force of thunder. The prosecutor sputtered objections, scrambling to discredit the child's testimony, but the momentum had already shifted. Laura rose, her voice like steel. "Your Honor, we now have direct evidence of coercion. What greater proof is there than a child under oath, admitting the truth despite the immense fear placed upon her?" She turned toward the jury, her eyes fierce. This is not just a case about bruises. This is a case about manipulation. About the way lies can masquerade as truth until someone brave enough tears the mask away. Veronica's composure collapsed entirely in the hours that followed. On the stand again, her carefully rehearsed facade cracked under Laura's relentless cross-examination. Dates did not align. Statements contradicted each other. And when the court demanded an expert review of the so-called bruises, medical testimony revealed what Laura had suspected all along. Cosmetics had been used, makeup designed to imitate injury. The revelation detonated like a bombshell. Jurors leaned back in shock. The gallery gasped audibly, and Richard, sitting only feet away from his wife, looked as though the ground had been ripped from beneath him. By the time the judge declared Maya cleared of all charges, the gallery was no longer murmuring in contempt but applauding with a tentative, almost reverent relief. Maya sat frozen for a moment, hardly able to comprehend that the nightmare was ending, and then, tears breaking loose once more, she covered her face with her hands and whispered, "Thank you. God, thank you." Laura placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice steady even as her own eyes glistened. "Justice won, Maya, you're free." Yet freedom was not the end of the journey, it was the beginning of something heavier. As Maya left the courthouse that afternoon, the blinding flashes of cameras followed her once more. But this time, the voices that had once hissed accusations now shouted questions tinged with sympathy. "Maya, how does it feel to be vindicated? Maya, will you sue the Hales for defamation? Maya, do you forgive them?" She kept her head high, offering no words, only silent dignity, because she knew no headline could capture the storm inside her. Richard followed her out, his face pale, his shoulders hunched under the invisible weight of shame. He called her name once, a hollow sound carried by the wind. She turned, her eyes red but fierce, and for a moment their gazes locked. He searched her expression for some trace of the trust they once shared, but all he found was a wall of hurt and betrayal. "I was wrong," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "I failed you. I failed her." But Maya, though her heart ached at his words, offered him no comfort. Instead, she whispered, "You failed, Lily, remember that." And with that, she walked away, each step heavy yet steady, a woman reclaiming her dignity. In the days that followed, Maya found herself at the center of a maelstrom. Reporters camped outside her small apartment, neighbors knocked on her door with awkward apologies, and strangers sent letters of support as though they could erase the months of agony with words on paper. She read some of them, setting aside those that spoke of strength and resilience, but most she tucked away because healing required more than validation from the outside world. It required forgiveness from within. Lily came to her first, escorted by a court-appointed advocate, her small arms wrapping around Maya's waist the moment she saw her. "I'm sorry," she sobbed into Maya's blouse. "I'm so sorry." Maya knelt, holding the girl tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, my little Lily," she whispered, "you were brave. You told the truth. You saved me." That embrace became the balm that began to heal wounds deeper than any prison walls could inflict. Richard came days later, stripped of his arrogance, his wealth and power, now meaningless against the truth that had shattered his household. He stood in Maya's doorway, his voice low and ragged. "I don't expect forgiveness," he admitted, "but I beg you to believe that I truly thought I was protecting her. I let myself be blinded, and for that I will carry shame for the rest of my life." Maya listened in silence, her heart torn between the memory of the man who had entrusted his daughter to her and the image of the man who had condemned her without question. At last she spoke, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Forgiveness isn't mine to give, it belongs to Lily, but as for me, I will not hate you. I can't. Hatred would only chain me to what you did, and I refuse to be chained anymore." In the weeks that followed, Veronica's empire of deceit collapsed entirely. Investigations exposed her manipulations, and the same society that once adored her now turned cold, casting her out of the circles she had so carefully courted. But Maya paid her no attention. She had no interest in watching her accuser fall. Her focus was on rebuilding what had nearly been destroyed. She returned to work, not in mansions or estates, but in her own small kitchen, where she began baking again with Lily by her side. They rolled dough, sprinkled sugar, and laughed until flour dusted their faces like snow. Those simple moments became the foundation of her healing, a reminder that love was not found in marble halls or pearl necklaces, but in the quiet resilience of truth. And yet, even as she began to heal, Maya carried with her the scars of what had been done. She knew she would never again walk into a room without remembering how it felt to have every eye turned against her. She knew she would never again hear her name spoken in a crowd without recalling the sting of whispered judgment. But she also knew that her story was not one of defeat. It was one of survival, of redemption, of a truth that refused to be buried. A new dawn years passed, but the echoes of that trial never fully faded from Maya's life. They lived within her like shadows at the edge of memory, sometimes faint, sometimes sharp, but always present, reminding her of how fragile truth could be when twisted by lies. Yet, in the same way shadows proved the presence of light, those memories also reminded her that she had survived what should have destroyed her. They reminded her that courage, even when found in the smallest voice, could shatter the chains of deceit. Maya's life after the trial was not an easy one, but it was hers, and for the first time in many years, she was free to shape it as she wished. She no longer wore the uniform of a maid who lived at the mercy of wealthy families. Instead, she wore her own clothes in her own home and moved with the quiet dignity of a woman who had reclaimed her narrative. In the early months, she struggled with nightmares. The clang of the gavel, the sting of strangers' whispers, the sound of Lily's voice trembling as she spoke the lie that nearly destroyed her. But each morning when she awoke to Lily's smile, to the simple joy of breakfast at the kitchen table, and the warmth of laughter rising in a small apartment filled with love, the nightmares lost a little more of their power. Richard, to his credit, never disappeared. Shaken to his core by the truth, he spent years trying to repair what had been broken. Though his marriage to Veronica disintegrated swiftly, ending in scandal and disgrace, his relationship with Lily became the focus of his redemption. Slowly, carefully, he learned to be present for her. No longer the absentee father hiding behind wealth and boardrooms, he began to attend her school events, to sit with her at dinner, to ask questions and listen. At first, Lily met his efforts with hesitation, but over time she softened, her forgiveness flowing in ways Maya knew children were uniquely capable of offering. As for Maya and Richard, their relationship remained complicated, balanced between respect, regret, and an unspoken acknowledgement that their bond had been permanently altered. He sought forgiveness more times than Maya could count, but she never gave him the absolution he wanted. What she gave instead was honesty. "I don't hate you, Richard, but I don't trust you either." And trust is harder to rebuild than anything else. Yet in that honesty there was freedom. She no longer carried the burden of trying to change his heart. She carried only her own peace, and that was enough. The true focus of Maya's life became something larger than herself. The experience had carved a scar so deep that she could not bear the thought of other children or other caretakers facing the same injustice. With determination forged in suffering, she began to speak publicly about her case, about the dangers of false accusations, and about the resilience required to survive them. Community groups invited her to share her story. Churches asked her to speak at women's gatherings. Her words, laced with raw truth and unwavering hope, touched audiences who saw not just a woman who had been accused, but a woman who had refused to surrender. Eventually, with the modest compensation awarded after a civil suit against Veronica, Maya started something she had only dreamed of, a foundation dedicated to supporting caretakers and children caught in the storms of legal battles. She called it the Lily Foundation for Truth and Care, named not only for the little girl who had once been her anchor, but also for what lilies represented: purity, resilience, and renewal. The foundation offered legal aid, counseling, and a safe space for families torn apart by lies or manipulation. It grew slowly at first, housed in a small office above a bakery, but over the years it blossomed into a sanctuary that touched countless lives. Lily herself grew into a bright, determined young woman. Though her childhood had been scarred by fear and manipulation, she carried within her the fire of the moment she had chosen truth over silence. That choice shaped her in ways even Maya could not have imagined. By her teenage years, she began volunteering at the foundation, helping children who were scared and confused, telling them in her own words that fear could be overcome. By the time she graduated high school, she was already speaking alongside Maya at events, her voice steady, her presence radiant with courage. One evening, years after the trial, Maya stood on the stage of a community auditorium, the foundation's annual fundraiser in full swing. The hall was filled with people, some who had once doubted her, some who had supported her, and many who were meeting her story for the first time. Behind her, banners displayed photographs of children whose lives the foundation had touched. In the front row, Lily sat beside Richard, her head held high, her smile proud. Maya took a deep breath, her hands steady as she gripped the podium. Her eyes swept across the crowd, and for a moment she saw not strangers, but echoes of the faces that had once condemned her, the jurors who had doubted, the neighbors who had whispered. But now she spoke not with desperation, not with fear, but with the quiet power of a woman who had survived. "There was a time," she began, her voice rich and steady, "when I believed my life was over. When lies spoke louder than truth, and when the world decided I was guilty before I had the chance to defend myself. I stood in a courtroom where people spat words like monster and abuser at me, and I thought I would never breathe freely again. But then something extraordinary happened. A child, terrified and trembling, found the courage to speak the truth, and that truth saved me." Her eyes flickered toward Lily, whose smile widened with tears shimmering in her eyes. "What I learned," Maya continued, "is that truth is not always loud. Sometimes it comes in whispers, in voices small and frightened. Sometimes it hides behind fear, waiting for the moment it can break free. But when it does, when truth is spoken, it has the power to tear down lies that seem unshakable. That is why we are here today. That is why this foundation exists. Because no child should be silenced by fear, and no caretaker should lose their dignity to deceit." The applause that followed was not the frenzied clamor of curiosity or judgment. It was the warm, rising tide of respect. It was the sound of a community that had once condemned her, now lifting her as a symbol of resilience. Later that night, as the crowd dispersed and the hall quieted, Maya stepped outside into the cool air. The city lights shimmered around her, but her gaze turned upward toward the night sky. Lily joined her, slipping her hand into Maya's, her voice soft but sure. "You saved me, Maya. You saved me when no one else did." Maya squeezed her hand, her heart swelling with both pride and humility. "No, my Lily, you saved us both. You had the courage to speak when I no longer had the strength. That's what gave me back my life." For a long moment they stood in silence, hand in hand, looking out at a horizon that no longer felt like a sentence, but a promise of new beginnings, of voices that could not be silenced, of lives healed and stories rewritten. And as dawn began to break across the city, a new dawn, golden and radiant, Maya knew she had finally stepped out of the shadow of accusation and into the light of truth. Her scars remained, yes, but they were no longer marks of shame. They were proof of survival, proof of love, proof of a woman who had refused to bow to lies. It was not just her redemption, it was her legacy.